The Siberian Abyss and the Ghost Made of Oil. Ladies and gentlemen, throw away your geography textbooks because they have lied to you. When you hear the word lake, your brain probably paints a pleasant picture. You imagine a calm body of water, perhaps some reeds swaying in the wind, a few ducks paddling around, and a nice spot for a weekend barbecue. It is safe, it is contained, it is understandable. But I need you to take that image and burn it. What we are talking about today is not a lake. It is a tectonic wound on the face of our planet. It is a rift in the Earth's crust that goes so deep it touches the mysteries of the primordial world. We are traveling to the heart of Siberia, to a place the locals call the Sacred Sea, but which science recognizes as a freak of nature. This is Lake Baikal. It holds 20% of all the unfrozen fresh water on the surface of Earth. Just think about that scale. If every single person in the world, all 8 billion of us, started drinking only Baikal water, it would take us thousands of years to drain it. It is an abyss that is 25 million years old. It is an isolated universe where evolution went completely insane, creating monsters and miracles that exist nowhere else in the galaxy. We are going to dive into the freezing darkness to uncover 13 facts that are kept out of the travel brochures. We are going to talk about lethal winds, fish that melt in the sun, terrifying underwater abysses, and ancient curses. But before we descend into this ice-cold hell, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the bell, because if you get lost in these waters, you are going to need a guide to find your way back to the surface. Let us begin our descent. The first thing you need to understand is that the water here is not just cold, it is hostile. But life finds a way, even if that life looks like something out of a science fiction horror movie. Imagine you are in a submarine, descending slowly into the pitch-black void. The pressure is building up, pressing against the hull, enough to crush a car into a soda can. And suddenly, in the beam of your spotlight, you see a ghost. It is a small, pale creature, hovering motionless in the crushing dark. It has no scales, it has no swim bladder, it is completely translucent. You can see its spine, its blood vessels, and if it is a female, you can see the babies inside her. This is the Golomyanka. And honestly, it is one of the most bizarre creatures on this planet. To me, it looks less like a fish and more like an alien entity that crash-landed in Siberia millions of years ago and decided to stay. The Golomyanka is a biological paradox. In the scientific world, it is known as the oil fish. Why? Because nearly half of its body weight is pure fat. It is essentially a swimming stick of butter with fins. This high fat content is crucial because it allows the fish to have neutral buoyancy. Most fish use a gas-filled organ called a swim bladder to move up and down in the water. But at the depths where the Golomyanka lives, a swim bladder would be useless. The pressure would compress it to nothing. So, nature came up with a different solution. Replace the gas with oil. Oil does not compress. It allows this little ghost to withstand pressure that would turn a human being into a red mist. But here's the part that truly blows my mind and adds a layer of body horror to this story. Because the Golomyanka is made mostly of fat and has fragile, thin bones, it cannot handle the heat. If a storm throws these fish onto the shore during the summer, or if a fisherman pulls one up and leaves it on the deck of a boat in the blazing sun, something terrifying happens. The fish does not just dry out, it melts. It literally dissolves. Only a greasy stain and a few bones remain. Can you imagine that? A living creature that liquefies just because the temperature went up a few degrees. It is like a vampire disintegrating in the sunlight. This creature is an endemic, meaning it lives in Baikal and absolutely nowhere else. It has adapted to this specific environment for millions of years, and its behavior is just as strange as its physiology. The Golomyanka performs a daily vertical migration that is the equivalent of an astronaut running a marathon every single day. During the night, they rise to the upper layers to feed on tiny crustaceans called epischura. During the day, they drop back down into the abyss, sometimes as deep as 500 meters or more. They are constantly moving between crushing pressure and surface waters. If we tried to do that without a slow decompression, our blood would boil with nitrogen bubbles. The Golomyanka does it casually, every single day. But let's talk about how they reproduce, because this is where the story gets tragic. Most fish lay eggs. They spawn millions of eggs and hope for the best. The Golomyanka does not have time for that. In the freezing waters of Baikal, eggs would develop too slowly or be eaten. So, this fish is viviparous. It gives birth to live larvae. This is extremely rare for fish in such cold latitudes. For a long time, there was a scientific myth, and honestly, I believed it for years until I dug deeper, that the mother Golomyanka dies immediately after giving birth. The story went that the process of releasing 2,000 or 3,000 larvae was so traumatic that her body just gave up, sacrificing herself for the next generation. It sounds poetic, doesn't it? A tragic sacrifice in the cold dark. Modern science tells us that this is not entirely true, and many females survive, but the mortality rate is still incredibly high. It is a brutal cycle. Life in Baikal is not a Disney movie. It is a survival game on hard mode. Now, you might be thinking, who cares about a small, oily fish? Why is this number one on our list? Because this ghost is the battery that powers the entire ecosystem. The Golomyanka is the most numerous fish in the lake. If you could weigh all the Golomyankas in Baikal, their total biomass would be more than all the other fish species combined. More than the famous omul, more than the sturgeon, more than the pike. They are the unseen engine. They eat the microscopic plankton and then they become food for the apex predator of the lake, the Baikal seal, which we will talk about later. Without this melting, translucent, skeletal ghost fish, the entire food chain of the world's deepest lake would collapse. It is the hidden foundation. It is everywhere, yet you will almost never see it alive. It lives in the shadow, hiding in the deep water, a fragile piece of fat that holds the ecosystem together. There is something deeply unsettling about an animal that you can look right through. When you see footage of them, their large pectoral fins spread out like wings, hovering in the black water. They look like angels of the abyss. But they are voracious predators in their own scale. They hunt with their mouths wide open, snapping up anything smaller than them. And they are cannibals. Yes, they will happily eat their own young if given the chance. That is the rule of the deep: eat or be eaten. The Golomyanka represents the true nature of Baikal. It is not the shiny surface water that tourists see. It is what lies beneath. It is a creature adapted to cold, darkness, and pressure. It is a reminder that we are looking at a lost world. When I look at the Golomyanka, I don't see a fish. I see a survivor from an era we have forgotten. It makes you wonder, if a fish can evolve to be made of oil and melt in the sun, what else is hiding in those 1,642 meters of depth? What other monsters are swimming in the dark, waiting for us to turn on the lights? This fish is just the appetizer. It is the weird, slimy introduction to a world that defies logic. But if you think a melting fish is strange, wait until you hear about the trees that learned how to walk to survive the shifting sands of the Baikal shoreline. That is where we are going next. The forest that refuses to die. We are dragging ourselves out of the freezing black depths and stepping onto the sandy shores of the lake. But do not think for a second that you are safe just because you are on dry land. The strangeness of Baikal does not stop at the waterline. It crawls up the beach. If you travel to a place called Sandy Bay, you will encounter a forest that looks like a glitch in the Matrix. It looks like a scene cut from a fantasy movie or a post-apocalyptic nightmare. We are talking about the famous walking trees. Now, pause and visualize a tree. You imagine a trunk going straight down into the ground, right? That is how nature is supposed to work. Roots are the anchor. They are meant to be buried deep in the soil, hidden from view. But here, the trees look like giant spiders. Their roots are exposed, lifting the trunk 2 or even 3 meters into the air. You can literally walk underneath the tree, standing between its roots as if you are standing between the legs of a wooden giant. It is incredibly disorienting. When you walk through this grove at twilight, with the shadows lengthening, your brain starts to play tricks on you. You get this creeping feeling that the moment you turn your back, these trees are going to pick up their roots and scuttle closer to you. They look like the Ents from Lord of the Rings, but less friendly and more desperate. So why are they doing this? Is it magic? Is it radiation? No, it is a brutal war between biology and geology. This bay is a wind tunnel. The winds here are relentless. For decades, the fierce gusts have been blowing the sandy soil away from beneath the pines and larches. The ground is literally retreating, disappearing from under their feet. Any normal tree would have fallen over and died years ago. But these Siberian trees are stubborn. They are survivors. As the sand blows away, they refuse to let go. They grip the deeper layers of the soil with a death grip, their bark hardening into armor against the abrasive sandblasting. The roots that were once soft and subterranean have turned into thick, wooden stilts. To me, this is one of the most powerful metaphors for life in Siberia. It is not just a botanical curiosity. It is an act of defiance. These trees are hanging on by their fingernails. They are screaming at the wind. "You cannot move me." But there is a tragedy here too. Gravity always wins in the end. As the wind continues to steal the ground, eventually the stilts become too high, the leverage becomes too great, and the trees collapse. When you visit, you see the fallen soldiers, the trees that finally lost the battle, lying like bleached skeletons on the sand. It is a surreal sight. Tourists love to take photos hugging the roots, smiling for the camera. But whenever I see pictures of these walking trees, I do not feel joy. I feel a sense of unease. It looks like an anatomy lesson gone wrong, seeing the internal organs of a tree exposed to the open air. It creates a landscape that feels alien, as if the rules of gravity and growth have been suspended. And remember, this is just the coastline. We have seen the ghost fish in the deep and the spider trees on the land, but now we have to look at the surface of the water again because something is popping its head up. Something that has absolutely no business being in the middle of the Asian continent. It is cute, it has big black eyes, and it is a biological impossibility that has baffled scientists for centuries. Get ready to meet the lonely castaway of the animal kingdom. The eyes of the abyss. Okay, take a deep breath. We have just walked away from the creepy trees. Now, look at the water. You see a head pop up. It is sleek, shiny, and it has the biggest, blackest eyes you have ever seen. It looks at you with a mixture of curiosity and ancient wisdom. It is the Baikal seal, or the Nerpa. And your brain should be screaming right now. Wait a minute, seals live in the ocean. Seals live in the Arctic. Seals live in Antarctica. We are in the middle of Siberia. We are thousands of kilometers away from the nearest saltwater. We are deep in the heart of the Asian continent. What is a seal doing here? This is not just a cute animal video. This is a biological mystery that has driven scientists crazy for decades. How did they get here? Did they teleport? Did they take a wrong turn at Albuquerque? The leading theory is that during the last ice age, a group of ringed seals from the Arctic Ocean swam up the Yenisei and Angara rivers, pushed by the advancing ice sheets. They traveled thousands of kilometers upstream, against the current, through a frozen wasteland, until they found this massive, deep lake. And then, the ice melted, the rivers changed, and the door slammed shut behind them. They were trapped, isolated. Cut off from the rest of the world for hundreds of thousands of years, evolution took over. In this closed system, the Nerpa changed. It became smaller, more agile. It developed claws that can rip through ice. It learned to hold its breath for 70 minutes, long enough to watch an entire episode of a TV show underwater. But the most insane adaptation? It is the only seal in the world that can pause its own pregnancy. Yes, you heard me right. If the conditions are bad, if there is not enough food, or if the ice is too thin, the female can literally hit the pause button on the embryo inside her. She can stop it from developing for months until she feels safe again. It is a biological superpower born of desperation. It is a level of control over life itself that human medicine can only dream of. And they are smart, terrifyingly smart. They have been observed using tools, playing games, and even seemingly mourning their dead. But here is the kicker. Despite their intelligence and their isolation, they are still wild animals. They are not pets. They are predators. They eat the Golomyanka we talked about earlier. They are the kings of this lake, but they are also vulnerable. Climate change is melting the ice they need to raise their pups. Pollution is threatening their food supply. When you look into the eyes of a Nerpa, you are looking at a survivor of the Ice Age, a refugee from the Arctic that made a home in the most unlikely place on Earth. But let's not get too comfortable with the cute seal faces. The Nerpa might be the king of the lake, but even kings bow to the forces of nature. And the force I am about to tell you about does not care if you are a seal, a human, or a steel ship. It is invisible, it is fast, and it kills without warning. You think you know what wind is? You have no idea. The breath of the mountain gods. We have seen the strange creatures in the water and the warped trees on the land, but now we must face the most immediate and violent threat Baikal has to offer. If you are ever planning a boat trip on this lake, you need to listen to this very carefully. Do not trust the blue sky. Do not trust the calm water. Baikal is famous for its winds, but there is one wind that is not just a weather phenomenon. It is a serial killer. The locals call it the Sarma. Imagine you are sailing on a beautiful sunny afternoon. The water is like glass. You are relaxed. Suddenly, you look towards the Primorsky mountain range and you see a strange, mushroom-shaped cloud gathering over the peaks. It looks solid, almost static. Experienced captains will turn their boats around and run for their lives the second they see that cloud. That is the only warning you get. Within minutes, the gates of hell open. The Sarma is a hurricane-force wind that is born in the cold river valley and accelerates through a natural gorge that acts exactly like a wind tunnel or the barrel of a cannon. Cold Arctic air piles up behind the mountains like water behind a dam, and when it spills over, it rushes down towards the lake, accelerating to speeds of 40, 50, sometimes 60 meters per second. That is more than 130 miles per hour. It hits the lake with the force of an explosion. I have read reports from survivors that sound like war stories. They say the wind is so loud you cannot hear a person screaming right next to you. It tears roofs off houses as if they were made of paper. It lifts cattle into the air. But the most terrifying thing happens on the water. In autumn and early winter, when the air is freezing but the lake is not yet covered in ice, the Sarma creates a deadly phenomenon called rapid icing. The wind whips up the waves, spraying water over the ship. Because the air temperature is far below zero, this spray freezes instantly the moment it touches the metal hull. Layer upon layer of ice builds up in seconds. A ship can become encased in tons of ice within an hour. It becomes top-heavy, loses stability, and capsizes, dragging the crew down into the freezing blackness. There are tragic stories of entire convoys of barges being smashed against the rocks. This wind does not just blow, it hunts. It is unpredictable, it is sudden, and it is ferocious. It reminds you that we are small. We think our technology makes us masters of the planet, but all it takes is a pressure difference in the atmosphere to swat us like flies. When the Sarma blows, the lake becomes a boiling cauldron of white foam and black water. It is a mesmerizing display of power, but you want to watch it from a very, very safe distance. This wind has sent countless ships to the bottom. It has claimed fishermen, researchers, and adventurers. And speaking of things lying at the bottom of the lake, that brings us to one of the greatest historical mysteries of the 20th century. We are moving from the forces of nature to the greed of men. We are going to talk about a lost treasure that might be sitting right now in the silt under a kilometer of water, waiting for someone crazy enough to find it. The Golden Ghost Train. We are leaving the howling winds and diving back into history, into the chaotic days of the Russian Civil War. It is the winter of 1919. The country is tearing itself apart. The White Army, led by Admiral Kolchak, is retreating across Siberia. They are desperate, they are freezing, and they are carrying something incredibly heavy. They are guarding the gold reserve of the Russian Empire. We are talking about hundreds of tons of pure gold bars, coins, and platinum. This is a fortune that could buy small countries. It is the gold of Kolchak. The legend says that as the White Army tried to cross the frozen Lake Baikal to escape the approaching Red Army, disaster struck. It was minus 60 degrees Celsius. The soldiers were starving and exhausted. Horses froze to death while standing. People dropped dead in their tracks, their bodies turning into ice statues instantly. And then, the ultimate catastrophe. Maybe the ice cracked under the weight of the overloaded wagons. Maybe a train derailed on the Circumbaikal Railway, plunging off the cliffs into the deep water. The stories vary, but the ending is always the same. A significant portion of the Tsar's gold ended up at the bottom of the deepest lake in the world. For 100 years, this story has driven treasure hunters insane. It is the El Dorado of Siberia. People have spent fortunes trying to find it. In 2008, the deep-sea submersibles Mir 1 and Mir 2, the same subs that filmed the Titanic for James Cameron, descended to the bottom of Baikal. Their mission was scientific, but everyone knew they were keeping an eye out for the gold. And guess what? They found something. At a depth of several hundred meters, the robotic arm of the sub picked up shiny metallic objects that looked suspiciously like gold bars. The news exploded. Had they found it? Was the mystery solved? But when they brought the samples to the surface, the excitement faded. It wasn't gold. It was just shiny rocks or debris. Or was it? Conspiracy theorists believe the gold is there, buried under meters of silt. The sediment in Baikal accumulates quickly. If a train fell in 1919, it would be covered by now. The lake is excellent at keeping secrets. The depth, the pressure, the darkness. It is the perfect bank vault. No one can break in. The gold of the dead empire sits there, guarded by the Golomyankas and the ghost shrimps. It is a story of greed, tragedy, and the futility of wealth. All that gold, all that power, now just cold metal resting in the eternal dark. It adds a layer of human tragedy to the natural wonders. Baikal isn't just a container of water, it is a graveyard of ambitions. But gold is not the only thing that disappears in this lake. If you were unfortunate enough to drown here, your body might never be found. Not because of the depth, and not because of the currents, but because of something much smaller, much hungrier, and infinitely more horrifying. We are about to meet the cleanup crew of Baikal, and trust me, you will never look at a shrimp cocktail the same way again. The flesh eaters in the dark. All right, I need you to brace yourself because this part is gruesome. We are going to talk about what happens to organic matter that falls into the lake. You see, in most lakes, if an animal dies and sinks, it decomposes slowly. Bacteria do the work, gas builds up, and eventually the body floats back to the surface. It is the natural cycle. But Baikal is different. Baikal is oxygen-rich all the way to the bottom, and this oxygen supports a massive army of scavengers. Meet the Gammarus. These are amphipods, small crustaceans that look like shrimp curled into a comma shape. There are hundreds of species of them in Baikal, ranging from microscopic to gigantic ones the size of a human hand. They are the janitors of the lake. They are the reason the water is so crystal clear. They filter the water, eating algae and detritus. But they are also ruthless opportunists. If a dead fish, a drowned bird, or something larger falls to the bottom, the gamorous swarm. Imagine thousands of tiny mouths working with mechanical efficiency. They can strip a carcass to the bone in a matter of days. There are stories, chilling stories, told by divers and locals, of bodies being recovered that were unrecognizable after less than a week underwater. No bloating, no floating to the surface, just consumption. The locals say, Baikal takes what is his, and the gamorous are the agents of that collection. They are efficient, relentless, and terrifyingly fast. I know, it sounds like a horror movie monster, but biologically, they are heroes. Without them, the lake would be a swamp. They keep the water pure. They are the immune system of Baikal. But knowing that doesn't make it any less disturbing to imagine a swarm of these things descending on you in the dark. It is a reminder that in nature, nothing is wasted. Death for one is life for thousands of others. The cycle is fast, brutal, and efficient. But wait, there is a paradox here. While the gamorous destroy soft tissue with frightening speed, the cold, oxygen-rich water of Baikal has a completely different effect on inorganic materials. While bodies might disappear, machines, ships, and structures are preserved in a way that is almost supernatural. It is as if the lake chooses what to keep and what to erase. Let's explore the underwater museum where time stands still. The Museum of the Frozen Moment. We have just discussed the terrifying speed with which the lake's tiny inhabitants can erase a living being from existence. It is a brutal, efficient, biological shredder. But now I want to show you the other side of this coin. This is one of the most haunting paradoxes of Lake Baikal. While it devours the soft and the living, it acts as a perfect eternal vault for the cold and the mechanical. If you were to dive into the deep, dark layers of this inland sea, you would find yourself walking through a graveyard where time has literally stopped. We are entering the world of Baikal's ghost ships, and honestly, this is where the lake feels less like a body of water and more like a massive, liquid-filled time capsule. To understand why this happens, you have to look at the chemistry of the water. In the world's oceans, a sunken ship is a doomed ship. Saltwater is aggressive. It eats through steel like acid. There are shipworms, terrible little mollusks called Teredo nivalis, that can turn a massive wooden hull into Swiss cheese in a matter of decades. In the ocean, history is slowly dissolved. But Baikal is fresh water. It is incredibly pure, almost like distilled water. There is no salt to trigger rapid corrosion. More importantly, those wood-eating worms do not exist here. They cannot survive the freezing temperatures or the lack of salt. And because the water is so rich in oxygen and stays at a constant, near-freezing 4 degrees Celsius at the bottom, the process of decay for inorganic materials slowed down to a near halt. Imagine you are a professional diver, or perhaps you are operating a deep-sea robot with a high-definition camera. You are descending through the darkness, 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters down. The light from the surface is long gone. Suddenly, your beam hits something solid. It is a steamship from the early 20th century. Perhaps it is one of the vessels that served the Great Siberian Way before the railway was completed around the lake. You expect to see a rusted, collapsing pile of junk, but instead, you see a ship that looks like it sank yesterday. The wood is not rotten. You can still see the grain in the planks. The paint, though faded, is still there. You can see the glass in the portholes, unbroken and clear. You might even see the name of the ship painted on the bow in elegant Cyrillic letters from the time of the Russian Empire. I find this absolutely chilling. It is one thing to see a wreck that has been reclaimed by nature, covered in coral and rust. It is another thing entirely to see a machine that looks ready to be raised and put back into service. It feels as if the crew just stepped off for a moment and will be back shortly. There is a specific ship, a tugboat, that went down in a storm decades ago, sitting at a depth of about 25 meters near the shore. Divers who visit it report that the steering wheel still turns. The lanterns are still in place. It is a museum where the admission price is the risk of your own life. But it is not just small boats. During the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway, the Russians faced a massive problem. Lake Baikal was in the way. Before they could build the tracks around the jagged cliffs, they had to carry the trains across the water. They ordered two massive ice-breaking ferries from England, the Baikal and the Angara. These were giants of their time. The SS Baikal was a monster, 100 meters long, capable of carrying 25 railway cars and hundreds of passengers. During the chaos of the Civil War that we mentioned earlier, the Baikal was shelled and burned. It sank into the depths. While the Angara was eventually salvaged and turned into a museum on land, the Baikal remains somewhere in the abyss. Think about the scale of that. A massive steel-hulled icebreaker, a masterpiece of 19th century engineering, is sitting somewhere on the floor of the lake. Because of the preservative qualities of the water, it is likely in remarkable condition. It is a ghost ship of epic proportions, a silent witness to a revolution and a fallen empire. Scientists and explorers are still searching for its exact resting place, and every time a new anomaly is found on the sonar, the world of history buffs holds its breath. To me, this is the most poetic part of the Baikal mystery. The lake is a librarian. It keeps a record of every mistake we have made on its surface. Every ship that was overwhelmed by the Sarma wind, every barge that was overloaded with gold or supplies, every plane that lost its way in the Siberian fog, they are all down there. They are not rotting away, they are being preserved for a future that might eventually have the technology to reach them. It is a haunting thought that if you could drain the lake tomorrow, you would find thousands of years of human history laid out on the floor, perfectly preserved, from ancient wooden boats of the indigenous Buryat people to modern snowmobiles and trucks that fell through the ice. This leads us to a very modern and very dangerous phenomenon. While the ships are preserved by the cold, the ice itself is becoming a trap. Every year, Baikal creates a massive, frozen highway that people use to cross the lake. And every year, the lake decides to open its mouth and swallow people whole. But it does it in a way that is so strange, so geometrically perfect, that it was actually first discovered by astronauts looking down from the International Space Station. We are moving from the sunken history to the cosmic anomalies of the ice. We are going to talk about the giant rings that appear on the surface, rings so large they can only be seen from space, and they are a warning of a silent, invisible killer rising from the depths. The geometry of the void. If you think you have seen everything the natural world has to offer, I want you to look up. Not at the mountains, and not at the clouds, but higher. I want you to look down from the International Space Station, orbiting 400 kilometers above the surface of our planet. In the late spring, as the sun begins to reclaim the Siberian wilderness, astronauts looking down at the frozen expanse of Lake Baikal noticed something that made them double-check their instruments. They saw giant, perfectly geometric rings etched into the ice. We are talking about circles so massive, 5 to 7 kilometers in diameter, that they are completely invisible to anyone standing on the ground. If you were walking across one of these rings, you would have no idea you were inside a giant, icy bullseye. You would just see endless white. But from the cold vacuum of space, it looks like the lake is being branded by some celestial force. For years, this was a genuine mystery. Some people, of course, went straight to the supernatural. They called them serial circles of the ice, suggesting that extraterrestrial visitors were using the lake as a landing pad or a communication hub. Others thought they were the result of secret military tests or underwater base activities. But the truth, as is often the case with Baikal, is far more grounded in terrifying physics. These rings are the fingerprints of a silent killer. They are created by methane. Deep beneath the floor of the lake, trapped under layers of sediment and extreme pressure, lie massive reservoirs of methane gas. Baikal is essentially sitting on a giant geological ticking time bomb. Every now and then, for reasons we are still trying to fully understand, a massive bubble of this gas is released. As the gas rises from the depths, it drags warm water up with it. When this column of rising, swirling warm water hits the underside of the ice, it creates a powerful underwater cyclone. This vortex thins the ice from below, melting it into a perfect circle. The ice becomes a fragile, slushy shell. From space, the contrast between the thick, solid ice and this thinned-out circle creates the visual effect of a ring. Now, imagine the danger. During the winter months, Lake Baikal turns into the world's most beautiful highway. People drive trucks, cars, and snowmobiles across the ice to save time. The ice is usually over a meter thick, strong enough to support a freight train. But when you enter one of these methane zones, the ice can thin out to just a few centimeters in a matter of hours. There is no warning. No cracking sound, no change in color. 1 second you are driving on what feels like solid granite, and the next, your vehicle is plunging into 2 kilometers of freezing water. Every year, dozens of cars disappear into the lake this way. It is the ultimate invisible trap. Personally, I find the idea of the singing ice even more unnerving. If you have ever stood on Baikal in the winter, you know it is never truly silent. The ice is alive. Because of the temperature fluctuations, it is constantly expanding and contracting, creating cracks that can be kilometers long. The sound it makes is like nothing else on Earth. It sounds like a mixture of whale songs, laser blasts from a science fiction movie, and deep, low-frequency groans that you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also the sound of a living entity that could swallow you at any moment. When you combine those haunting sounds with the knowledge that there are invisible circles of death scattered across the surface, the lake starts to feel less like a natural wonder and more like a predator playing with its prey. But there is a darker side to this methane story. This isn't just about a few unlucky drivers or cool photos from space. These methane releases are a symptom of a much larger global problem. Scientists are watching these rings very closely because they are an indicator of how the planet is changing. If the permafrost at the bottom of the lake continues to warm, the amount of methane being released could increase exponentially. Methane is a greenhouse gas that is 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide. If Baikal burps all its gas at once, it wouldn't just be a local disaster, it would be a global climate catastrophe. The lake isn't just holding water, it is holding the breath of the planet. And while we are talking about things that shouldn't be happening to the lake, we need to address the elephant in the room. Or rather, the green slime in the water. For millions of years, Baikal has been the gold standard for purity. It was the sacred sea where you could drink the water directly from the surface without any fear. But something is changing. A shadow is falling over the crystal-clear water, and this time, we can't blame the methane or the ancient ghosts of the White Army. This time, the monster is of our own making. We are going to talk about the green invasion that is suffocating the shorelines and turning parts of this pristine paradise into a rotting swamp. It is the story of the Spirogyra, and it is a wake-up call that might be coming too late. The Green Stranglehold. For thousands of years, the people living along these rugged shores have shared a single undisputed truth. The water of Baikal is holy. They called it the Sacred Sea, not just because of its size, but because of its impossible purity. There is an old tradition where travelers would dip a silver cup into the middle of the lake and drink the water directly, claiming it tasted like melted stars. For 25 million years, the lake has been a self-cleaning machine, a masterpiece of biological engineering that kept itself pristine through ice ages and tectonic shifts. But today, if you visit certain parts of the shoreline, that silver cup would come up filled with a thick, foul-smelling green slime. The sacred sea is being suffocated, and for the first time in its ancient history, the threat isn't a natural disaster or a geological shift. The threat is us. This is the story of the Spirogyra invasion, and honestly, it is the most heartbreaking chapter of the Baikal saga. It is the one part of this script where I cannot talk about the majesty of nature without feeling a deep sense of shame. Spirogyra is a type of filamentous algae, a bright green thread-like weed that normally has no business in the deep, cold waters of Baikal. For millions of years, the lake was too nutrient-poor for this kind of growth. It was an oligotrophic environment, which is just a fancy scientific way of saying it was a watery desert where only the most specialized organisms could survive. But over the last decade, something has changed. Massive blankets of this green sludge have begun to wrap themselves around the underwater rocks, smothering everything in their path. If you were to go diving in the affected areas today, you wouldn't see the beautiful, crystal-clear vistas we talked about earlier. You would see a wasteland. It looks like a scene from a horror movie, where a monstrous fungus has taken over a city. The algae grows in thick, matted carpets that can be several meters thick. It covers the stones, blocks the sunlight, and chokes the life out of the local species. But the real tragedy is what it is doing to the sponges. Baikal is home to unique freshwater sponges that look like miniature green forests growing on the lake floor. These sponges are the unsung heroes of the lake. They are the living filters, the liver of the water, processing liters of liquid every day to keep it clean. But the Spirogyra is literally strangling them. It entangles the sponges, prevents them from feeding, and eventually kills them. When the sponges die, they turn white and crumble, and the lake loses its primary defense mechanism. You might be wondering, how did this happen? Did a meteor bring this weed? No. The answer is much more mundane and much more frustrating. It is phosphorus. Specifically, the phosphorus found in the detergents and soaps used by the millions of tourists and the growing settlements around the lake. Every time someone washes their clothes in a nearby stream, every time an outdated sewage system leaks into the ground, we are essentially pouring high-octane fertilizer into a delicate ecosystem. We are feeding the monster. The lake, which was once so balanced, is now being overwhelmed by a tidal wave of human waste. I find the visual of this catastrophe particularly haunting. In the late summer, when the water warms up, the Spirogyra begins to die and wash ashore. It doesn't just disappear. It piles up on the beaches in massive black rotting mounds that can be seen from a great distance. The smell is unbearable, a mixture of sulfur and decay that hangs in the air of what should be a pristine national park. Locals have reported that even the cattle refuse to drink from the shore when the algae is blooming. It is a visual representation of a biological collapse. It is the lake's way of screaming that it can no longer digest what we are forcing it to swallow. But there is a deeper layer of irony here. While the shallow shorelines are struggling with this man-made plague, the deeper parts of the lake remain some of the most scientifically valuable real estate on the planet. Even as we struggle to protect the water we can see, researchers are using the water we can't see to look into the very origins of the universe. It is a bizarre contrast. On the surface, we are fighting a battle against laundry detergent and green slime. But 300 meters below that slime, humans have built one of the most sophisticated scientific instruments ever conceived. We are moving from the shame of pollution to the pinnacle of human curiosity. We are going to talk about the giant, invisible eye buried in the Siberian ice that is looking not at the lake, but through the earth and out into the deepest reaches of the cosmos. We are going to meet the ghost particles of Baikal. The eye in the abyss. I want you to forget about the green slime for a moment. We are moving away from the shore, away from the human mistakes and the rotting algae, and we are heading out into the center of the lake, where the water is over a kilometer deep and the ice is as thick as a castle wall. We are shifting from the world of biology to the world of high-energy physics. And honestly, This is the part of the Baikal story that feels most like a top-secret government project from a blockbuster movie. While we have been looking down at the fish and the gold, a team of brilliant frozen scientists has been building a giant eye. But this eye isn't looking at the water. It is looking through the entire planet Earth and out into the deepest, darkest reaches of the cosmos. This is the Baikal Gigaton Volume Detector, or GVD, and it is searching for ghosts. To understand why this is happening in the middle of a Siberian winter, you have to understand what a neutrino is. Scientists call them ghost particles. They are the smallest, most elusive building blocks of our universe. They are born in the hearts of dying stars, in the middle of massive black holes, and during the violent explosions of supernovas millions of light years away. They are so tiny and have so little mass that they can pass through solid matter as if it weren't there. Right now, as you are reading this, trillions of neutrinos are passing through your body every single second. They pass through the walls of your house, through the core of the Earth, and out the other side, without ever touching a single atom. They are the ultimate messengers of the universe, carrying information from the beginning of time. But there is a problem. How do you catch a ghost? The answer is that you don't catch them. You wait for them to make a mistake. Every once in a long while, a neutrino will accidentally collide with the nucleus of an atom. When this happens in water, it creates a tiny, microscopic flash of blue light, known as Cherenkov radiation. It is like a sonic boom, but for light. To see these tiny flashes, you need three things: a massive volume of water, absolute darkness, and incredible transparency. And that is why Lake Baikal is the most valuable scientific laboratory on the planet. Imagine the scale of what they have built down there. They didn't just drop a few cameras into the water. They have lowered hundreds of glass spheres, each the size of a basketball, onto long, weighted cables that stretch from the surface down to the very bottom of the lake. These spheres are packed with some of the most sensitive light detectors ever created by human hands. They are organized into clusters, forming a giant three-dimensional grid of sensors that occupies an entire cubic kilometer of water. It is a digital forest submerged in the abyss. When a neutrino from a distant galaxy crashes into a water molecule inside this grid, the sensors detect the blue flash and record the exact time and direction of the light. By connecting the dots between these flashes, scientists can trace the path of the particle back to its source, pinpointing a black hole billions of light years away. I find the process of building this thing absolutely heroic. Every winter, when the ice is thick enough to support heavy machinery, the scientists go out onto the lake. They live in shipping containers in the middle of a frozen desert, where the temperature drops to -40 degrees and the wind never stops howling. They use massive saws to cut holes in the ice, perfect squares that look like portals into another dimension. They then lower these strings of glass eyes, kilometers long, into the freezing blackness. It is a grueling, dangerous job. If a cable snaps, or if the ice shifts, years of work and millions of dollars can vanish in a heartbeat. But they do it because they are explorers, searching for the secrets of the Big Bang from the bottom of a Siberian lake. There is something deeply poetic about this to me. We have this ancient primordial lake, the oldest and deepest on Earth, acting as a lens for the most advanced technology we have. We are using the most ancient water to understand the most ancient light. It turns Baikal into a bridge between the beginning of the world and the end of the universe. It is a reminder that even in the most remote corners of the globe, human curiosity knows no bounds. We are not just inhabitants of this planet, we are observers of the cosmos, and we are using every tool at our disposal to understand where we came from. But there is a reason this telescope is so deep. It needs the protection of the water. Above it, the lake is hiding another secret, a secret that is far more dangerous than a few ghost particles. While the scientists are looking for light from distant stars, there is a different kind of energy trapped beneath the floor of the lake. It is an energy that could either power the future or destroy the present. It is cold, it is flammable, and it looks like a piece of dirty ice. We are moving from the mysteries of space to the burning ice of the Siberian deep. We are going to talk about gas hydrates, the climate bomb that is sitting at the bottom of the abyss. The burning ice and the climate bomb. We have looked at the ghosts of the cosmos through the frozen lens of the lake, but now we need to look at something much more tangible and, frankly, much more terrifying. We are heading back down to the very floor of the lake, into the silt and the darkness, to encounter a substance that defies every rule of logic you learned in primary school. I want you to imagine a scientist reaching into the freezing water and pulling out a chunk of what looks like dirty, white ice. It is cold to the touch. It is solid. But then, the scientist takes a regular cigarette lighter, flicks the flame, and holds it to the ice. Instead of just melting into a puddle of water, the ice catches fire. It burns with a steady, eerie blue and orange flame. This isn't a magic trick, and it isn't a special effect from a Hollywood movie. This is a gas hydrate, often called burning ice, and Lake Baikal is one of the only places on Earth where you can find it in such massive, accessible quantities. To understand why this matters, we have to look at the chemistry of the deep. Gas hydrates are essentially cages of water molecules that have trapped a single molecule of methane gas inside them. They only form under very specific high-pressure and low-temperature conditions, exactly the conditions found at the bottom of a 1,600-meter-deep lake. It is a concentrated form of energy. A single cubic meter of this burning ice contains 160 cubic meters of methane gas. To me, this is one of the most fascinating paradoxes of the natural world. Nature has found a way to package a highly flammable, explosive gas inside a frozen crystal of water. It is like a geological battery charged with millions of years of organic decay. But here is where the story takes a dark, Bermuda Triangle kind of turn. You might have heard legends of ships suddenly vanishing in the middle of a calm sea, leaving no wreckage and no survivors. For decades, people blamed aliens or magnetic anomalies. But many scientists now believe that gas hydrates are the real culprits behind these disappearances, and Baikal is the perfect proving ground for this theory. Remember those giant rings on the ice we talked about? Those are caused by methane releases. If a massive amount of gas hydrate suddenly destabilizes, perhaps due to a small underwater earthquake or a change in temperature, it releases a colossal plume of methane bubbles. As these bubbles rise to the surface, they do something terrifying to the physics of the water. They turn the lake into a giant, frothing jacuzzi. The density of the water drops instantly. A ship stays afloat because it is less dense than the water it displaces. But when that water becomes half gas and half liquid, the ship loses all its buoyancy. It doesn't capsize, it doesn't leak, it simply falls. It drops through the water as if it were falling through thin air, plummeting into the abyss in a matter of seconds. There is no time to send a distress signal, no time to lower lifeboats. The lake simply opens its mouth and swallows the vessel whole. I find this thought absolutely paralyzing. Imagine being on a sturdy steel ship, feeling perfectly safe, and then suddenly the very liquid beneath you turns into a void. It is a reminder that our safety is entirely dependent on the invisible laws of physics, and Baikal has a way of breaking those laws whenever it feels like it. However, the threat to local shipping is nothing compared to the global threat these hydrates represent. Scientists often refer to the methane trapped at the bottom of places like Baikal and the Arctic Ocean as a climate bomb. Methane is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas, far more effective at trapping heat in our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. As our planet warms, the water in the lake also warms, even if only by a fraction of a degree. This warming can trigger a chain reaction. The gas hydrates melt, releasing methane. The methane enters the atmosphere, increasing global temperatures. This causes more hydrates to melt, and the cycle accelerates until it is completely out of our control. This is what keeps climate scientists awake at night. It is called the Clathrate gun hypothesis. It is the idea that we are standing in front of a loaded gun, and the trigger is being pulled by our own actions. Baikal is a massive reservoir of this potential energy. It is a beautiful, serene landscape, but beneath that beauty is a chemical monster that could reshape the future of our species. To me, the burning ice is a symbol of the dual nature of our planet. It is a source of wonder, a potential fuel for the future, but it is also a lethal warning. It shows us that everything is connected. The cold dark of the Siberian deep is linked to the temperature of the air in New York, London, and Tokyo. But while the threat of the gas hydrates is a slow-motion catastrophe, the lake is also capable of sudden, violent acts of destruction that can change the map of the world in a single night. We have talked about the ice, the water, and the wind, but we haven't talked about the ground itself. Baikal is not just sitting on the Earth, it is tearing the Earth apart. We are going to move from the chemical mysteries to a historical tragedy where the land itself betrayed the people living on it. We are going to visit the site of the Tsagan Proval, the Siberian Atlantis, where an entire region vanished beneath the waves in the blink of an eye. The Siberian Atlantis. We have spent our journey exploring the depths, the creatures, and the invisible particles of Lake Baikal. But now, I want to take you back in time, to a cold winter night that changed the geography of Siberia forever. Most people think of geological changes as something that happens over millions of years. Slow, grinding movements that we can only notice through scientific instruments. But Baikal does not always play by those rules. Sometimes it decides to reshape the world in a single, terrifying night. This is the story of the Tsagan Proval, the Siberian Atlantis, a moment when the Earth simply gave up and the lake claimed its prize. Imagine the date, December 31st, 1861. In the small villages scattered across the fertile plains of the Selenga River Delta, people were preparing for the new year. Life here was good. The soil was rich, the livestock was healthy, and the lake was a provider. There were 5 main villages in an area known as the Tsagan Steppe. People were sleeping in their wooden houses, unaware that beneath their feet, the tectonic plates of Asia were screaming under immense pressure. At around 9 o'clock in the morning, the screaming turned into a roar. A massive earthquake, estimated today to have had an intensity of 10 on the 12-point scale, ripped through the region. It wasn't just a shaking of the ground, it was a literal collapse of the crust. For 3 days, the earth heaved and groaned. Survivors reported that the ground became like liquid. Massive cracks opened up, swallowing cattle and fence posts. But the most terrifying part was the water. Warm, muddy water began to spout from the wells and the cracks in the earth, flooding the basements of houses. The people realized with horror that the land wasn't just shaking, it was sinking. The Tsagan Steppe, an area of about 200 square kilometers, was dropping into the abyss. As the ground sank, the icy waters of Lake Baikal rushed in to fill the void. Imagine being a villager, watching your entire world, your fields, your barns, the cemetery where your ancestors were buried, slowly disappear beneath the rising tide. This wasn't a flash flood that would eventually recede. This was the lake moving in permanently. 1,300 people lost everything they owned in a matter of hours. Miraculously, because the sinking happened over a few days rather than a few seconds, most of the people were able to escape to higher ground. But they could only stand and watch as 5 entire villages were erased from the map. Today, if you look at a map of the eastern shore of Baikal, you will see a large, shallow bay called Proval, which literally means the breach, or the collapse. If you take a boat out into the center of this bay on a clear day and look down through the water, you are looking at a ghost world. Beneath the surface lie the foundations of houses, the remains of streets, and the ghosts of a community that existed for generations. It is a haunting, watery graveyard that serves as a permanent reminder of the lake's power. To me, the story of the Tsagan Proval is the ultimate reality check. We build our cities and our lives on what we think is solid ground. But on the shores of Baikal, solid is a relative term. We are living on the edge of a giant that is still growing, still hungry, and still moving. The disaster of 1861 was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much larger global process. You see, Baikal is not a finished product. Most lakes are born from glaciers or dammed rivers, and they eventually fill with silt and disappear. They are temporary features of the landscape. But Baikal is different. It is a rift lake. It is a place where the continent of Asia is literally being ripped in half. The earthquake that swallowed the Sagan steppe was just one small crack in a process that has been going on for 25 million years and will continue for millions more. When I think about those villagers watching their homes sink, I realize that they were witnesses to the birth of something massive. They weren't just victims of a flood. They were seeing the planet expand. Every time the Earth shakes in this region, and it shakes thousands of times every year, the lake gets a few millimeters wider and a few millimeters deeper. It is a slow-motion explosion of the Earth's crust. This leads us to our final and most awe-inspiring fact. We are moving from the tragedies of the past to the epic destiny of the future. We are going to talk about the grand design of this rift zone and why Lake Baikal is not actually a lake at all. We are going to look at the birth of the fifth great ocean of planet Earth. We have reached the final stop on our journey into the Siberian abyss, and it is time to reveal the most profound secret of all. Everything I have told you so far, the ghost fish made of oil, the treasure lost in the silt, the invisible circles of death on the ice, and the villages swallowed by the earth, is part of a much larger, much more epic story. We have been calling this place a lake. Even the locals call it the Sacred Sea, but both of those names are wrong. They are temporary titles for a geological phenomenon that is far more ambitious. If we could speed up time, moving forward by millions of years in a single second, we would see that we are not looking at a body of water at all. We are looking at the birth of the fifth great ocean of planet Earth. To understand this, you have to look at the very foundation of the continent. Most lakes are like scars on the skin of the Earth. They are shallow, they are caused by external factors like glaciers, and they eventually heal and disappear. But Baikal is a rift. It is a deep, fundamental tear in the tectonic fabric of the world. Right beneath the center of the lake, the Earth's crust is being pulled apart by massive, unstoppable forces. The Eurasian plate and the Amurian plate are in the middle of a messy, violent, multi-million-year divorce. They are moving away from each other at a rate of about 2 centimeters every single year. Now I know what you are thinking. 2 centimeters? That is how fast my fingernails grow. How can that be an ocean? But in the grand, slow-motion ballet of geology, 2 centimeters a year is a breakneck sprint. Think about the scale of time we are dealing with here. Baikal has been opening up for 25 million years. If this movement continues, and all signs suggest that it will, the rift will eventually become so wide and so deep that the Earth's crust will simply snap. When that happens, the geography of our planet will be rewritten. The gap will eventually reach the ocean, and salt water will come rushing into the heart of Siberia. The mountain ranges we see today will become the coastlines of a new sea. Siberia will be split in two, and a new, vast body of water will separate the land masses, creating a new continent. To me, this is the most humbling thought in the world. We look at the map and think of the borders of our countries and the shapes of our continents as permanent. But we are just living in a brief snapshot of a world that is constantly being torn apart and rebuilt. This is why Baikal is so deep. It isn't just a hole. It is a canyon that is still being dug. Scientists have found that the actual bottom of the rift, the solid rock floor, is actually 9 kilometers below the surface. The only reason the lake isn't 9 kilometers deep is that it has been filling up with sediment for 25 million years. If you could clear out all that mud and silt, you would see a chasm deeper than the highest peaks of the Himalayas. It is a vertical world, a hidden dimension that we are only just beginning to map with our satellites and our submersibles. When I think about the future of Baikal, I feel a strange mixture of awe and insignificance. We spend our lives worrying about years, decades, or perhaps a century if we are lucky. But Baikal operates on a clock that we can barely comprehend. It has outlived the mammoths, it has watched empires rise and fall, and it will still be here, growing wider and deeper, long after the very memory of our civilization has faded into the dust. It is a living, breathing part of the planet's evolution. It is not a static postcard. It is a work in progress. As we conclude this exploration, I want you to take one last look at that crystal clear water. It is a miracle of nature. It is a reservoir of life, a vault of history, and a window into the cosmos. But more than that, it is a reminder of our place in the universe. We are guests on a planet that is far more powerful, far more mysterious, and far more dangerous than we like to admit. Lake Baikal doesn't care about our gold, our ships, or our scientific instruments. It follows its own laws, driven by the heat of the Earth's core and the weight of the water above. It is a place that demands respect, and if you ever find yourself standing on its frozen surface, listening to the laser-like cracks of the singing ice, remember, you are standing on the birthplace of an ocean. You are witnessing the Earth tearing itself apart to create something new. Thank you for traveling with me into the dark heart of Siberia. If this journey has changed the way you look at the world, if it has made you feel that spark of wonder and a little bit of that primordial fear, then my job here is done. The world is full of mysteries, but few are as deep, as cold, and as beautiful as the sacred sea. Keep your eyes on the horizon, stay curious, and never forget that beneath the surface of the things we think we know, there is always an abyss waiting to be explored. Until next time, stay safe and try not to let the ice melt beneath your feet.